He thought firing me was a formality. He didn't realize the foundation still had my name on it. My name is Neil Archer. I'm 41 years old. I live in South San Jose, California. I've been with Nexita Tech since we were a 4-person startup hacking prototypes in a converted print shop. Mondays used to mean our operations huddle, cheap coffee, and standing room only debates about scaling architecture. But that morning, 9:06 a.m., I remember because I was 6 minutes late and still the first one in. It was just him, Asher Langston, the new chief strategy officer. Technically, in reality, he was the CEO's son-in-law, married into the Langston legacy 2 months ago, handed a title 2 weeks later, and now sitting at the head of the table like he paid for the damn roof. He was scrolling through his phone like I was interrupting his meeting. "Morning," I said, setting my tablet on the table. No one else was there, just him. He didn't look up, just nodded toward the center of the table. That's when I saw it, a beige envelope with my name scrawled across the front. No greeting, no company logo. Just, "Neil." "What's this?" I asked. He finally looked up, folded his hands like he practiced the motion in a mirror. "It's not personal, Neil. We're restructuring legacy positions." Legacy. I had to bite my tongue not to laugh. That's the term they use when they want to rip out the foundation and throw up drywall with buzzwords. I picked up the envelope, still sealed. I didn't open it. I didn't have to. I already knew what it said. Severance Package 8HR Contact. A list of career counseling services no one ever calls. "You think I'm a legacy?" I asked, eyes on him now. "You think that's what I am here?" "I think we're evolving," he said, voice neutral, like a dentist explaining why a tooth has to go. "You've built some amazing things, no question, but it's a different era now." He leaned back, all confidence and lack of context. "No hard feelings. No hard feelings. That's what people say when they think they've won." I nodded slowly, stood up, slid the envelope under my tablet. "Sure," I said. "No hard feelings." But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. I turned to leave, and just before I pushed the door open, I paused. "Hey, Asher," I said, keeping my tone light. He looked up. "You do know who owns the base license for NextForge Core, right?" His brow furrowed slightly. "Legal handles that stuff?" I smiled. "You should double check." And I walked out. Not because I was angry, not even because I was blindsided. I walked out because it finally hit me. He didn't know. He thought firing me was a formality. He didn't realize that when I built NextForge, I didn't just write code. I wrote the rules. And that foundation still had my name on it. 10 years ago, I was sleeping in an ICU hallway chair when NextForge Core was born. My mom was 3 doors down at Mercy Ridge Medical, fading fast. Late-stage pancreatic cancer. It was already everywhere. She didn't want anyone fussing over her. "Just sit with me," she whispered that first night. So I did. Laptop on my knees, charger strung across a yellow-tiled floor. IV alarms beeping down the corridor like they were part of the soundtrack. I was working on a new framework, something that could run scale adaptive without bending latency into a knot. Back then, it wasn't called NextForge. It was just Corebase v4.nb, a rough directory with skeletal architecture and a mess of test stubs. I'd been sketching pieces of it in my notebook for months, but that week, it all poured out. In between morphine checks and nurses changing lines, I wrote, "Mom asked me not to leave. I didn't. I slept sitting up for 5 days, eyes half closed, fingers still typing. Her hand curled around mine during the worst of it. I kept the code flowing between the hours she slept. On the 3rd night, around 2 a.m., I got an email from Darren Sachs, Nexita's legal contractor at the time. He'd heard I was working on a modular system and wanted to file a provisional patent for IP clearance. "Can you sign this doc ASAP?" he wrote. "It'll cover you if someone tries to scoop it before it's formal." I clicked the link, opened the PDF. The provisional claim was thin, barely more than 3 pages, just enough to timestamp the invention and identify the author. It asked for a legal name. I typed Neil Archer. My birth name. Not Neil Foster, the one HR knew. Not the name on my ID badge. That change came 2 years later, after I married Rhea and took her last name. I didn't think much of it at the time. I wasn't hiding anything. I just signed and hit send. No fanfare, no lawyers. Just a name on a form filed at 2:17 a.m. from a hospital hallway with a vending machine that only took exact change. 6 months later, Nexida brought me on full time. By then, the prototype was functional, bare bones, but stable. They loved it, especially the load efficiency numbers, which came out better than anything we'd benchmarked. They told me I'd have a team, a real office, a chance to build this thing out for enterprise. I took the offer, and somewhere along the line, they just assumed the code was theirs. No one ever asked who originally filed the patent. No one checked which entity owned the prototype. No one even noticed that the earliest commits in the code repo came from a private Bitbucket account called ADIN Labs. They just ran with it, called it NextForge, slapped the Nexida logo on it. I didn't push back. Why would I? I was still grieving, still building, still believing we were in this together. But behind the scenes, I kept copies of the filing, of the Git logs, of the metadata. I never contested anything, but I never transferred ownership either. They thought I was just another employee. They never read the first signature. It was only this week, after that beige envelope landed in front of me, that I finally pulled up the original patent doc again. Page 2. Section 1.3, Framework for Modular Service Partitioning in Hybrid Data Systems. Inventor, Neil Archer. Date filed February 12, 2015. My contract with Nexida, effective August 18th, 2015. That's a 6-month window. 6 months when every line of NextForge core was mine, not theirs. That document had been sitting quietly in the archive all these years, untouched, unreferenced, irrelevant until now. They'd forgotten the name, but I hadn't. Back when we were 3 guys eating instant noodles in a warehouse that still smelled like toner ink, I met a contract attorney named Carrie Delano. She was the sister of an early investor, some Stanford guy with too many opinions and a silent partner clause. I was 29, running on caffeine, hope, and a duct-taped MacBook. Carrie had this quiet intensity, the kind of person who didn't waste syllables. We sat across from each other in a greasy lunch spot with tables that wobbled if you breathed too hard. She didn't care. She ordered matzo ball soup and a side of blunt truth. "You're the architect, right?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, trying to downplay it. She stirred her soup once. "Then don't let them pretend they own what you built." I blinked. "It's just a startup. We're all in it together." She raised an eyebrow. "They're in it with you. That's not the same as ownership. Make it legal." That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I didn't trust the guys, I did mostly, but because something in her tone had struck a nerve. So while the others debugged session load errors and argued over what shade of blue the UI should be, I got to work. I pulled up the California Secretary of State's LLC filing portal and created Archer Dynamics. Simple structure, no partners, just me. Registered a P.O. box, submitted the EIN paperwork, and used an old college email to keep it out of the shared inbox. Within 24 hours, it existed. Then I transferred full IP rights for NextForge Core, version 0.3 alpha, schematic diagrams, API documentation, encryption modules, everything into that LLC. I time-stamped it, logged it, had Carrie review it quietly under an NDA she didn't even need, but offered anyway. I never talked about it, not even when I came on full-time at Nexida, not when we got funded, not when we moved out of the warehouse and into glass-walled offices with espresso machines and HR policies. I stayed quiet. They asked for code. I gave it to them. They asked for system specs. I handed them pristine white papers. They asked me to speak at product demos, investor calls, customer onboarding. And I did, every time. But the rights, those never left Archer Dynamics. When I changed my last name after marrying Rhea, I submitted the paperwork through HR like everyone else. Neil Foster became Neil Archer in the system, but no one flagged the match. Legal didn't blink. After all, I was already in the org chart. No one thought twice. They didn't know what they missed, and I never corrected them. Across 4 restructures, 3 product relaunches, and 2 CTO offers. I turned down, I held the firewall. Quiet, legal, immovable. I wasn't protecting my ego. I was protecting the backbone of the entire product. Because I knew how these things go. I'd seen it happen to smarter people, founders who blinked, engineers who thought code was enough, visionaries who forgot that the signature matters more than the slide deck. They got squeezed out, pushed aside, called legacy by guys like Asher Langston. People who married their way into power and thought an org chart gave them the right to flip switches they didn't build. Well, my switches were locked, and now they'd fired me, thinking I was just an old name on an outdated payroll line. They thought they got rid of the architect. But the architecture? It had its own vault. 3 days after they walked me out, I got an email with the subject line, "Confidential inquiry regarding IP ownership." It came from someone at Orvik Systems. I stared at the sender address for a long time, trying to decide if it was bait, a trap, a test. The sort of thing Nexida's legal team might float out to see if I'd bite. But the address checked out. So did the signature. Bryce Lannon, VP of Architecture Strategy. I remembered the name. We'd crossed paths at a federal standards roundtable years ago. Back then, Orvix was still building their own low-latency stack and struggling to get funding. Not anymore. The email was brief, direct, respectful. Mr. Archer. We've reviewed public filings and private patent records connected to NextForge Core, and understand there may be unresolved questions around licensing, ownership, and architectural rights. If you are open to discussion, we would appreciate the opportunity to speak with you in confidence about a potential exclusive licensing relationship with Orvik Systems. No pressure, no assumptions. Respectfully, Bryce. That was it. No legal threats, no long-winded explanations. Just an open door. I closed the laptop and stood in the middle of my kitchen, holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold. The silence hit me all at once. No Slack pings, no morning check-in calls, no spreadsheets or production alerts or sprint reviews. Just me, alone, with my system. And a question that wouldn't leave my head. If I accepted their offer, would it make me a traitor? I stared out the window. The sun was coming up over my backyard fence, lighting up the old lemon tree Rhea planted before she left. My breath fogged against the glass. What was I actually protecting? Nexida had kicked me to the curb without blinking. No handshake, no goodbye lunch. Just a beige envelope and a hollow line about legacy roles. They didn't fire me because I'd failed. They fired me because I was easy to erase. At least, that's what they thought. But Orvix, they weren't asking me to destroy Nexida. They weren't waving money in my face or trying to weaponize me for some tech turf war. They were offering something else, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Choice. They'd done their homework, knew about the provisional filing, the LLC, the transferred docs. They'd probably pieced it together better than anyone at Nexida ever had. They knew the system, they understood the backbone, and they wanted it from the source. They didn't want revenge. They wanted realignment. And somewhere in the middle of that kitchen, I realized, maybe I did too. I pulled out a legal pad from the drawer and scribbled one word at the top. Non-negotiables. Not because I was trying to squeeze them, not because I needed leverage, but because, for the first time in years, I got to define what came next. Not in terms of quarterly OKRs or marketing decks, or Asher Langston's slick little roadmaps. This wasn't about money. It was about finally being able to protect what I built, not from competition, but from people who stopped understanding it the second they got comfortable. I didn't reply to Bryce that morning. I waited. Thought, walked around the block 3 times with no destination, sat back down, stared at my screen. Then I typed 4 words. Let's schedule a call. The licensing folder was buried in a banker box under my home office desk, 3rd one from the left. I hadn't opened it in years, still had the post-it on the front. NextForge, Early Legals, 2015. I pulled it out, dropped it on the dining table, and popped the lid. Inside were the same stiff legal envelopes and stapled drafts Carrie and I had hashed out a decade ago, back when everything felt fragile and worth protecting. I flipped past the LLC formation docs, the provisional patent confirmation, the IP transfer forms. Then I found it, the licensing agreement. Nexida had wanted one back in 2015 to keep the lawyers happy. I was already a full-time engineer by then, but we needed a legal mechanism for the company to use the framework while Archer Dynamics still technically held the IP. It was standard stuff. Boring language, lots of whereas and heretofore. But I remembered Clause 11.3 like it was yesterday. I opened to page 14, Clause 11. 3. Restrictions on usage and modifications. Licensee may not sublicense, redistribute, modify, or deploy NextForge core or its derived architecture without the written consent of the original architect, as named in Exhibit B. I flip to Exhibit B, Original Architect, Neil Archer. No expiration date, no transfer clause, no exceptions. I sat back in my chair and exhaled. They'd never redlined it. That clause was still active, still binding, still buried in the one document no one at Nexita had read in at least 8 years. I could already see the problem beginning to unfold in their pipeline. NextForge 3.0 was supposed to launch within the quarter. Deployment packages would be sent to clients. Licenses would be audited. Procurement officers would flag inconsistencies. And someone, somewhere, would finally ask, "Wait, who owns this again?" I closed the folder gently and placed it beside my laptop. Then I opened Nexita's investor portal, still had guest credentials from an old advisory access profile, and pulled up the roadmap they'd presented last quarter. Sure enough, NextForge 3.0, deployment window scheduled for July. Revenue forecast, 42% of annual earnings. I almost laughed. They'd built the entire year on a product they didn't even control. And this clause, it didn't just slow them down. It invalidated everything. Every licensing agreement signed since 2015 that didn't have my consent, non-compliant. Every copy of the core modified without my sign-off, unauthorized. I wasn't just a missing piece, I was the load-bearing beam. And now that I was gone, they were building their next-gen launch on scaffolding that was about to collapse. Asher Langston probably thought he'd cleaned house, saved the company a salary, made room for strategic growth. What he didn't know was that legal was about to choke on Clause 11.3. The second they tried to push production, I didn't need to lift a finger. All I had to do was let the system run as written. Let the documents speak for themselves. I wasn't trying to blow anything up. That was never the point. But when someone tries to bury you alive, it helps to remember you were the one who poured the concrete. I met with Orvix at 10 a.m., sharp on a Monday. No entourage, no suit. Just my laptop bag, a printed folder, and the calm that comes when you've already buried the past. They had reserved a private conference room at a hotel in Redwood City, not too flashy, just enough distance from both our histories. Bryce Lannon greeted me at the door with a quiet handshake. No small talk, no fake excitement. Just focus. "We appreciate you coming in person," he said, sliding a glass bottle of water across the table. "I don't like negotiating over email," I replied. "Too easy to pretend things are more complicated than they are." He nodded. "Then let's keep it simple." He opened a leather folder and turned it toward me. 10-year licensing contract, exclusive rights to NextForge core under Archer Dynamics, full attribution on all public materials, advisory role with guaranteed autonomy, no office hours, no board meetings, no corporate page with a cheesy headshot, just impact. Payout, $910 million over 10 years, in structured, clean, transparent. I scanned every line, flipping pages slowly, while Bryce sat across from me without blinking. There were no traps, no silent claims, no attempts to bury anything in legalese. They didn't need control of the code. They just wanted the right to build from it with the person who understood it best. When I got to the signature page, I paused for a moment. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about Asher Langston or Nexita or anyone who thought they could fire the system and keep the structure. This was about ownership, about seeing something I'd built, the real version, not the marketing deck, breathe again. About watching it evolve with people who respected the architecture, not just the branding. People who saw me not as a legacy title to discard, but as the reason it all still worked. I signed. No hesitation, no ceremony, just ink on paper, and a quiet closing of the folder. Bryce nodded once. "We'll handle the formal announcements next quarter. Quiet for now. Good, I said. Quiet works. As I stood to leave, I didn't linger. No handshake photo, no back patting, no flash drive full of memories. Just me, stepping back into the hallway with the kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. Nexida could panic now. They could fire their architects and promote empty titles and pretend the system belonged to them. They could spin up all the dashboards and launch plans they wanted. But none of it mattered anymore. I'd done my part. Quietly. Thoroughly. Permanently. They would figure it out. Just not in time to stop the bleeding. And Orvix, they didn't need to beat Nexida. They just needed to outlast the collapse. The Nexida homepage glitched out at 7:42 a.m. on a Wednesday. I wasn't watching it live, but someone was. By 7:55, my phone buzzed with a screenshot. White space where the NextForge 3.0 launch banner had been, replaced with a 404 and a line of placeholder text that shouldn't have been public. Component license invalid. Deployment denied. See? Architect compliance check. By 8:30, I was getting texts from old coworkers. Tina, Ops. Did you do something? Raj, Infra. They're freaking out. Legals digging into legacy contracts. Heard your name mentioned. Derek, ex-CTO. Whatever you did, bravo. I didn't reply. I was sitting on my porch with coffee and no reason to rush. At 10:12 a.m., Nexida's legal team issued a red alert bulletin to all departments, the kind with the subject line in all caps. Review of all licensing agreements, immediate compliance risk. I didn't have to read the contents to know what they were panicking over. Clause 11.3, my name on Exhibit B, the fact that they'd built their entire 3.0 deployment off a foundation they never legally controlled. The panic hadn't even reached full boil yet. At 2:12 p.m., the first blow landed. One of Nexida's biggest institutional investors, Midpoint Equity, pulled $83 million in committed funding. Publicly, a notice hit the wire. We are suspending future investment in Nexida Technologies pending internal review of product IP conflicts and risk disclosures. Translation: we found the crack in the wall, and we're not waiting to get buried. I didn't smile. Not exactly. But I did exhale. That was when I got the message. A former mentee, Mia, who now worked in systems testing, forwarded me a voice clip. Private internal audio, she wrote. You didn't hear it from me. I pressed play, emergency executive meeting. You could hear people shuffling papers, the air thick with nerves. Then Asher Langston's voice, high and tight. Wait, who approved this? It's under Archer, not Brooks. Another voice chimed in, nervous, uncertain. We assumed the 2015 licensing agreement was superseded during the 2019 restructuring. Assumed? Asher snapped. You assumed? Do we even own NextForge? Then silence. Not arguing, not deflecting. Just silence. I paused the recording. There it was. The moment it hit them. The moment the corporate illusion snapped in half. And they realized the thing they'd fired, the person they'd dismissed as legacy, was still holding the cornerstone. They'd promoted a strategist, cut the architect, and forgot to check the wiring. Now the system they thought was theirs was walking out from under them. By 5 p.m., public-facing systems had gone dark. I got another message, this one from someone I barely remembered, procurement lead maybe. It just said, "Can you talk? They want to make it right." I didn't answer. Because the truth was, they couldn't make it right. They couldn't unsign the old contracts, couldn't erase the compliance clause, couldn't swap out the code without unraveling everything NextForge had evolved into. And they sure as hell couldn't replace me. They thought legacy meant obsolete. Turns out, it meant irreplaceable. 6 months later, I stood behind a curtain at the Federal Tech Infrastructure Forum, watching the crowd applaud for someone else. It was a strange feeling. Not nerves, not pride exactly. More like quiet gravity, like watching a pendulum return to center after swinging too far for too long. Please welcome the creator of NextForge Core, Neil Archer. The voice echoed across the auditorium. I stepped out. No fanfare, no spotlight burst. Just a warm round of applause from people who knew the difference between code and marketing, between founders and figureheads. I shook hands with 3 Orvix engineers at center stage, 2 of whom I'd trained at Nexida years ago. They looked older, sharper now, but when they saw me, there was something honest in their eyes, respect that hadn't been printed on a company t-shirt or forced at an all-hands. We took our seats on the panel. The moderator dove right in, no gimmicks. We talked about real systems, fault tolerance, modular failover logic, post-quantum security in hybrid stacks. No buzzwords, no slide decks with cartoon lightning bolts, just code, infrastructure, and long-term resilience. I didn't mention Nexida, didn't have to. Everyone already knew. You could see it in the audience, how people leaned forward when we discussed the way systems break quietly, long before they explode publicly. How minds in the room started connecting dots. Who built what? Who owned what? Who lost control of what? After the panel wrapped, people swarmed the floor, asking follow-ups, exchanging business cards. I stood to the side, watching the flow of questions move toward the engineers. That was the point. Let them shine. I was halfway through packing my notes when a young woman approached me, early 20s, probably just a couple of years out of school. She looked familiar in that way. You recognize your own younger self in someone else. Sleeves rolled, backpack slung sideways, confidence just barely outrunning doubt. I just wanted to say, "Thank you," she said. "They used to say you were just part of the old crew." I looked at her. "Yeah?" She nodded. "But you were the system." I didn't reply. Didn't need to. She already knew. I shook her hand and left the floor. Outside, the sky over DC was soft gray. I walked alone to the taxi stand, no press behind me, no camera in my face, no official chaperone trying to keep me on message. And that was the best part. Because for a long time, I thought survival meant staying in the room, fighting for a seat at the table, letting them call you legacy if it meant staying near the thing you built. But I was wrong. Sometimes the real fight isn't staying. It's knowing when to walk out, quietly shut the door, and wait. Not for revenge, not for a headline, just for the truth to surface. You don't have to yell to be heard, you just have to survive long enough to be right.